I am so excited about us sharing on this topic because I was on a mission several years ago to the Philippines, the first mission to the Philippines, and went with Steve Mapes. And while we were on the mission, and Steve started sharing with me about things that took place in his youth, and he called it Youth Mission for Christ or something like this. And I said, what is this? I've never heard of this. It seemed like everything always started out of the center place. This time he said, well, this is what we did in Michigan. He starts explaining this to me, and I was pretty excited. And then years later, I'm visiting with somebody else, Jim McKitty, and he's telling me about Youth Venture for Christ and what's happened. And then I get to know Jay Havener, and Jay says, well, I used to be one of the instructors for, one of the leaders for Youth Venture for Christ, and this is what happened. And every time I get more and more excited, and then I go on a mission with Fred, and he shares with me how it changed his life. I said, brother, you got to come to conference this year. I need you to be able to share this. He said, I can't do it. He shares with me all the things he can't, and God opens a door, and Fred's being able to be here with you today. And so I just want to share with you from personal testimony of ministering with these men, whether they're the instructor or whether they were the youth that was involved into it. It's made a difference in their ministry today. And so I'm going to turn this over to Fred, and my hope is when this all, towards the end of this, we can ask some specific questions on how can we implement this. Not just sit here and say, man, that was great, that worked 40 years ago, but how can we implement this now in whatever region we can, or even across all the church. So Fred, it's all yours.
Hello, everyone. I am Elder Fred Brown, Jr. I've been in the priesthood. It'll be 40 years this year. I know you're thinking, there's no way that guy's that old. But, yeah, I know I look older. But I was actually ordained the year that the church split. And so my priesthood kind of parallels the struggles, which I really didn't even put that together until recently, even though I was aware of it. I'm like, yeah, that's true. I was right from the beginning of the struggle. One of the things that saved me and guided me in the right direction was this program called the Youth Venture for Christ program. It's probably the most powerful program. I think it is the most powerful program we had in Michigan. And I grew up in Michigan, and there were youth leaders who were very dedicated, and they had to be because we had large youth groups and we had a lot of different programs that were going on. So we had our youth retreats and youth camps, just like all of you. We had caravans for the youth, and we had this program. And this program is one that was needed in the church for lots of reasons. I think part of it is because it trained us to be leaders in the church, not just as for directing us in the ways of priesthood, but also for our ladies who were part of this program, who became youth leaders and Sunday school teachers and music directors and all of that. So it helped the whole scheme of things. And I want to tell you a little bit about it. So the goal is for this program was to put on a Bible school program in some area and receive leadership training at the same time. So the ages for this was high school, and in Michigan at that time, 10th grade was the youngest you could be to be in this program. So I encourage that is kind of where it stay. You need, I think 9th grade, you're still a little flaky. I think 10th grade is when you start to grow up a little bit more. And I'm not saying that there's not some youth who are a little more mature than others, but I think that is a good age to begin this program. So the numbers, approximately 20 youth, would be pretty primo for this program. Running a youth Bible school for a week long is going to require a lot of bodies, a lot of manpower. And 20 youth can probably handle it. If you had a little bit more, great. We did have so many in our program at one time that we actually split into 2 Bible school programs in Chatham, Ontario. So we actually split and had 2 programs. Even though we all were trained in the one, we split once we got to the trip. So anyhow, the requirements for the youth to be a part of this was they had to attend weekly prayer and testimony services. They had to attend Sunday services. So this isn't just a bunch of kids saying, yeah, let's get together and do something fun and whatever. That's not really what this was for. Those youth retreats and youth camps are more of that gear. This one is more in the way of training. So Sunday services were required. This should actually say 4 huddles. I believe there were 4 huddles that we had to go to. So I'm going to back this up for a second. Oh, no, it won't show up there. Oh, it did?
3 or 4.
Oh, yeah, I tried to erase it. I forgot this is on their program, their computer. Anyhow, there were actually 4 huddles, I believe, that we went to. And remember, I'm going back 40 years now, but I'm quite certain there were 4. And so we would start off in like September, and every other month we would go. So September, November, February, or January, and March. And then after that, we were pretty geared to go for this week-long Bible school. We had to complete, this should say 3 sets. And I was reminded of this just today. So these changes I'm making right now, sorry it says 2, but if I make handouts, I'll change that to 3. But there were 3 sets of essay questions that we had to, I shouldn't say, well, yes, they were sets because you might have 5 to 7 essay questions that you had to answer. And so you took it home, you would receive one at the first huddle, and you would have 2 months to get it completed. You can use any resource you want. You could go to a priesthood member. They sometimes handed us tracts from the church. You could use any resources that you wanted to answer these questions. And so the youth would have to, during those 2 months, get those answers, turn them in at the beginning of the next huddle, and they would be graded. And you had to pass them. And if you didn't, they handed them back to you and said, go do it. Or they would just say, maybe there's certain kids that aren't geared for this program. Okay, some didn't even do them. And if you don't do the essays, you don't go. So they might give you a chance to correct some things, but if you didn't do the work, you just weren't allowed. It's just the way it was. They needed dedicated youth. Yes?
Were those questions all the same questions to each group, or were they kind of mixed up?
They're the same.
They're all the same. Okay.
Yeah. Did the youth talk to each other about those answers from time to time? I can pretty much guarantee that they did. So someone might have a better resource than someone else, and maybe they didn't feel like their answer was complete or satisfactory, and so they would say, what did you get for this? I know that stuff went on because I was one of the guys that might do it, or did do it. So they would hand them out, had to be returned at the next one. You had to attend 3 out of the 4 huddles. So we understand that sometimes things come up in families. They go on have a family gathering or something on a weekend of their huddle. They understand that. You're still going to answer the essay questions, but you might not attend that huddle. But you better be at least the other 3 that were available. Anytime anybody has a question, go ahead and fire away. I'll answer them as best I can. As far as the staff, they needed men of the priesthood. I thought that was very important that the staff had priesthood men involved. And this, to me, I think you need at least 1 or 2 weathered priesthood men on staff, meaning they've been around, they're experienced. This isn't for a bunch of young priests and deacons to take on and run with a bunch of young youth or older youth. You need someone to oversee that has some wisdom and insights as to how the program should run. And sometimes if the youth are too close to the leaders, it can cause an issue. So we actually were fortunate. We had a patriarch who was on ours. He was one of the top leaders of our youth program. And we had an elder who ran, he's the one who collected all the essays. He's the one who put the essay questions out and collected all of them, graded them. And then there were a bunch of people like Jay Havener and that who helped make this program run. They made the gears. They made the gears move. So you also need women. The boys and the girls are going to be separated at times for whatever reason. Women, it's important that there's women on staff who can counsel with the girls over whatever is going on, and men who can counsel the boys and so forth. So it was always important, and it probably a 1-to-5 ratio is probably a good ratio to have for a leader to campers or venturers. So I was thinking about the staff and how important their personalities were to make this thing engaging. And it's really important that they have positive attitudes, positive counsel and guidance, encouraging, joyful, willing to serve. Those things are really needed in a program like this. You need a leader in charge of the essay home assignments, collection and grading. You need a music instructor because the kids are singing at these huddles. I'll tell you more about the huddles in a minute. You need a housing coordinator for the huddles. You need a coordinator for tracting. And tracking is when you take some of the tracts that the church put out and you go around the neighborhood by 2 by 2. A van will drop off the kids at different areas around your congregation, and you will go from house to house inviting people to come to church and handing out tracts. We've had some really good testimonies of the youth and the conversations they got into with the people of the community. And it did bring out people to the Sunday service. You need somebody who will coordinate the home visits. The youth were required to go on some home visits from time to time. Class instructors in preparation for the summer Bible school. Sunday morning worship service planner. The Venturers were in charge of the 11 o'clock service. So there's different ways that the Sunday service was run. I'll talk a little bit more about that later, but they are the main people in charge. And not that there wasn't an elder who oversaw it, believe me, there was, but the youth really drove it. You need an activities coordinator for downtime. There are times when we were, for the week long, where we had to do something that was off-site from time to time. And a pastor would be important, I think, to this program. So I want to talk to you just for a few minutes about the huddles. So these weekend huddles, which there were 4 of them, they are weekend-long, focused classes and activities focused on molding the youth into Bible school leaders, teachers, and beyond. The focus was a time to build knowledge and understanding of the restoration work. And I don't think our youth know enough about the restoration work. In fact, maybe we all don't know enough about the restoration work. and the experiences of the early day saints. And I know some of us are very familiar with that, but the youth need this. It was a time to get them out of their comfort zone through interactive activities with each other. Including the community and the congregation. A time to form groups and begin planning various instructional and fun activities for the children's Bible school. A time for fun interaction with each other. So one of the things that I put down here I thought was important is this: you don't want to over-program these kids into wearing them down, which is something that can happen if you're not careful. So there has to be a little bit of a balance. There's got to be some breathing room for fellowship. I think that's important because unity among this group is so key to its performance. Let's look at housing now. So the ventures and leaders will need housing in the homes of the congregation's members. So when you go away for this weekend, this isn't young people going into a church and laying out sleeping bags in the church. The goal of this program is to get the youth interacting with adults and visiting with them and talking with them about various topics of the church in their own homes. So it was important that somebody set up, and houses vary. There could be 5 kids staying at one house because of the size or their accommodations, and there might be only 2 staying at another house. But you always wanted at least 2, and sometimes there would be a leader with that pair. And it should be random because this youth group has to you can't allow cliques. There's cliques that start to form all over the place because of the past of, this small group of kids used to hang out all the time. And what they did was they randomly put us, or maybe it was on purpose, put us with people that we didn't know that well, another youth that maybe wasn't as involved as some of the other youth. And so they might put someone with, try to match up personalities to bring the best out in each person. They should be instructed on how to act appropriately, respectfully, and graciously in a host home. So the venturers, it's important that they know how to behave in someone's house, that they're to be helpful and they're to be gracious in everything that they receive, because when you stay in a host home, you're receiving not only a place to stay, but they're providing food, snacks, all kinds of things. So, and I just think that's an important aspect of this. And they should be instructed on how to begin conversations with their host. This is a great time to start asking your host, when were you baptized into the church? How far back does your heritage go? Were you involved in any youth groups when you were growing up? And to hear people begin to open up to you about their past and their experiences in the church, or if you ask them, do you have any testimonies of the church or whatever? Those kind of conversations are rich and need to take place. And so the youth should be prepared to have those conversations. Have any questions so far? Yes?
So were the huddles, were they staying with congregation people in the huddles, or was it just on the week that they were?
Say it once more?
So you had the huddles.
Yeah.
Was that were they staying with congregation people at that, I'm sorry. Were they staying with people in the congregation during the huddles or just during the week of the retreat?
During the huddles.
Okay.
And during the week-long trip. So it
So
was
the huddles were at different congregations or different spaces?
Yes, we bounced all over the place going to huddles. It's whoever could accommodate us. So someone's going to call around and say, can we have a huddle at your congregation, and tell them what it entails. And they'll tell you if they can house you and handle that many kids or not. It's something that had to be discussed with the pastor and so forth. Yeah.
I really like this.
That's not on.
Not on. Hello, there it is. I really like this because it's bringing the kids to Christ. Growing up in Michigan too, we had similar programs, but it wasn't as advanced as this. But there's another side of this that I think gets overlooked is the gender gap. Bringing young people together with the older people so that they can realize, that, hey, these are people.
Yeah.
They're really good people, because when I grew up in Midland, we had a real active youth group there too, but there was still that gender gap. And my best friend and I said, we need to do something about this. So we asked an old couple one time, we said, hey, can we come over Saturday evening? We'll bring dinner, and we just shared dinner together. We made like tuna noodle casserole or something really silly. And we had the best time getting to know them. And then the next Wednesday, they stood up and said, man, this was wonderful. So all of a sudden, we're asked, hey, can you put up a sign-up sheet? So we put a piece of paper up there, and poof, it was full. And I think that's part of what we're dealing with too, is that gender gap, realizing that not only do we go to church together, but we're really close because we're brothers and sisters. And I like seeing this together because it's a positive path toward the kingdom of God in our lives.
Let me ask you, where do you think in our church have we lacked the most for our youth? Where do we begin to lose them the most? Yes. Jack.
I think we've lost we on now? Woohoo! Hello. Hi.
There you go.
Okay. No, I think where we've really have affected our youth as well as our families has been the lack of home ministry. Because, one thing that used to be very, very important was that the families were visited at least every month. Every month they were visited, and I think it made a difference too. It took care of that gender gap too.
Yes. Yep, in the back. Paul.
I've heard this stated several times recently, which I believe it's true. We lose our youth because we're always concentrating on the church rather than Jesus Christ. And so they don't gain that testimony in Christ that they need to hold them to Him. I've heard a number of people express that recently, and I think another way is when our children get old enough to see that we're not practicing what we're preaching, it's not as important to them anymore.
I think it's really important that our church and our leaders and our parents all teach the kids that you can't separate Jesus Christ and the church. And to do that is wrong, because Jesus Christ is the church. If you take Him out, you have nothing. And the purpose of the church is to minister Christ unto the souls of man, right? To guide them into His kingdom. And when we start to separate and say the organization and Jesus are like this, we're doing wrong, because He's the chief cornerstone and He's the overseer of the church. We can't let that concept go. We have to keep teaching that, because, like I said, the church is where these kids are going to experience the gifts of the Spirit, because this is where the Lord restored His church, right? I mean, that's my feelings about it. I don't like the idea of separating the two, and making them two separate things, because we have nothing. We're just a shell if we don't have Jesus. Brian?
One of the things I like about this program is that it gives the youth something to do. It isn't just that they got to be at church. They got an opportunity that they're needed. And I just see that is, I was talking to some youth the other day, and they said, sometimes the older people beat themselves up because of what more could they have done to keep the youth. And this youth said, it was a decision we got to make. We got to make the decision that we're going to stay active and be involved in the church. But what we can do as adults is they need to understand that they're needed and it's important. And I just like the program as much for us to be able to show them that there's something that they can do. And whenever they see that they are participating and making a difference, then I think they're going to find that they want to participate even more.
Yeah, the witness, getting kids into a position where they must witness is like getting them over a hump. Until they try something and see how Christ works with them or they work with Christ, they won't grasp it. They got to experience it. Yes.
You know, some of our branches are small, so they have to work and coordinate with neighboring branches, okay?
Yeah.
That's my understanding. So the next question I'd have, this is supplemental to the youth camps and retreats. Okay.
Yes, because when I was
We're not-
growing,
not
when
gonna
I was
re-
growing up, I went to all of them. So your area has to coordinate the huddles with the retreats, the camper retreats rather than the venture huddle retreats or huddles. They have to coordinate the weekends so that they're not running into each other, because I got to go to all of the camps, all the retreats, all of the venture huddles and the venture trip, along with a caravan from time to time. So I was always involved. I went to two reunions. We had 2 reunions in Michigan. I went to both of them. I mean, that was my summer, and that was my school year as well. So, in the back.
Another thing that, as youth, is the infighting. As we grow up, we see the infighting within the church, within the congregation, and within the priesthood and specifically. And when we see the priesthood fighting with each other and arguing with each other, they're supposed to be in charge. They're supposed to be working together. And how are they supposed to lead us if they can't even agree with each other? And that's one of the main things, in my opinion, that we need to work on and we need to change directly and immediately.
Yeah, that's a good point, because that kind of confrontation between can cause the youth to start withdrawing, right? They see what's going on. They're like, what's going on here? For us to not engage our kids in the conversations of the struggles that you and I went through, I think is wrong. If you think that you are protecting them by not telling them the things that happened and sharing with them the different perspectives or the stances that you're taking, that you feel about how the church went this way or went that way and why you stayed here and what you believe to be right, and show them your evidence of why you believe it's right,
Married kids that became young adults, all of a sudden they were just totally missed altogether. It's just, what happened to us? Did we get the plague or what happened on it? There wasn't a follow through, and that's a hard transition, becoming a young adult, and there's more that needs to be happening in that transition.
it's challenging because kids are becoming educated at that time, right? They're going
Yeah.
to colleges, they're going to vocational schools,
Yeah.
they're getting jobs.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
it's a very important time in their life to continue to reach out. So we missed that program, so we dropped them, and all of a sudden they were just kind of let go. So we're not important, so they just kind of walked away from it.
I was,
Could you include young adults also?
I think that would be a different program. It might be step 2 or phase 2. We have not done that, which is a mistake. I think we dropped that. But you got to remember the manpower that it takes to run. You guys have manpower here. In this area, the number of saints that you have, there could be phase 2, where the kids at college age are getting involved in things like this, or continuing to stay involved, or inviting more youth that maybe didn't participate earlier because they weren't ready for it. Go ahead.
One thing I did is senior high, junior high camp together. Is when the kids got older, one of the transitions I did is I got the young adults as the counselors in training.
Yeah.
Then, so you give them responsibility, move them on, and step up there on that end of it. So that's one thing. Get out in Illinois.
Yeah.
In Quad City and that. So.
And I would definitely propose stage 2, especially here in the center place, because looking at my children, I've got one that's a priesthood member that's staying involved, but the other one's gone completely away from the church. And that phase 2, I've seen how important that is, because once they graduate high school, the world is going to take them. You know, and if you don't have enough faith, if they haven't developed enough faith in Jesus Christ, the world is going to teach them not to believe. And so that phase 2 that you mentioned, I think that would be a great thing to start around here.
In the back?
So there is currently a young adult ministries. They used to be called young adult ministries. It was for people after 18, all the way up to 30s, 40s. It was originally for single people, but here just within the last year or two, they have adjusted it to where it's married couples as well. They just changed the name from Young Adult Ministries, or YAM, to Twerties, 20s and 30s. But they are on Facebook. They do have gatherings and get-togethers, potlucks, and they've gone out, done not trips or anything like that, but they have had get-togethers and things like that.
And I think that's great that you do something like that. This is going to level up everyone in that group, depending on how you run it. I don't know what a phase 2 looks like, but it would be something more than that. So, and that is the lost group that Mark was talking about. Is that group is when they start to fade. So, I want to share a testimony with you about the struggle and how important it is that our youth understand the struggle and went through it. When I was called to the priesthood when I was 16. I was ordained after my 17th birthday, just after. And I was in the Youth Venture for Christ program. And I saw the struggle that the church was going into, and it actually intrigued me. Who was right? I wanted to find out for me. And my dad always told me, don't just believe something because I tell you. Find out for yourself. And maybe that was his way of washing his hands and saying, I'm not going to take responsibility if I'm wrong, and you're following me, maybe. I don't know. He wanted me to be my own man. He wanted me to think for myself. And so I studied. I found the scriptures that showed what the church was doing was wrong. And so there was a little bit of a schism at times in our youth programs, because some of the youth's parents or mothers might have been being ordained to the priesthood, and another group there wasn't. So, but the youth always seemed to love each other. That was one of the wonderful things about it, is we still loved each other. And I remember going to a conference where they first started to bring in that doctrine, and they wanted to ordain the first women in the area. And I think I was 16 at the time, or 17, and I was 17 at the time. So I went to the conference, and I sat with the youth, and they started reading off the names for the ordinations, priesthood calls and ordinations. And there were 3 ladies, I think there were, and one of them was my buddy's mother, who was sitting right behind me. And so when the vote came, I voted against her, voted against it. And when the next one came, I voted against that, and the next one came, I voted against that. And then I heard him say behind me, oh, he doesn't have something against my mom. He's got something against the women in the priesthood. And I turned around and I said, absolutely. I said, this isn't about your mom. I don't have anything against her. I said, this is about the situation of the church. So when I left the Youth Venture for Christ program, there were still some youth in there who were struggling because some of the leadership was pushing some of the stuff that was going on in the church, the new doctrine. And so I had a friend who was still in it, and he told me of his struggles at the huddles that he was going to. And I wrote him a letter. I knew he was having trouble, so I wrote him a letter. He lived in Canada. His name was Eddie. I wrote Eddie a letter, and I said, Eddie, I know things are going on in the church are rough. I said, I think the prophet is going in the wrong direction. Here's why. I laid it out for him, showed him the scriptures. And then I said, stay strong in the way that you believe, blah, 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 blah. And I sent him the letter. Well, it was probably just a few months later that a high priest went and visited this young man's mom at the home. And the high priest said, you need to get on board. The church is heading in this direction. The youth are all behind what's going on in the church. We're ready to move forward. And she goes, whoa. She says, the youth isn't all behind this. He says, oh, yes, they are. She says, no, they're not. And she says, what are you talking about? And she went into her son's bedroom and got my letter and brought it out. And he says, read this. So he read this letter. And he says, okay. So it wasn't just days later, I got a call from a patriarch in the district, and he read me the riot act. And here I was, 18 years old. And he was going up and down on me. And he says, if you ever send another form letter around like this again, and I said, hold on. I said, that wasn't a form letter. I said, that was a personal letter that I sent to this friend of mine. It was a form letter, and if you send any more of these around, I'll have you in front of the Standing High Council, and we'll have you silenced. And here I am, 18 and shaken. I was shaken. My dad wasn't home, and this guy's telling me what can happen to me, and I'm thinking, here I am, 18 years old. I could have said right there, I don't need this. Have it. I'm going to go off. I'm going to go get an education. I'm going to go make some money and make a life for myself. But I couldn't because of the experiences I had in the church that grounded me so deeply in the truth of the doctrine, I couldn't go anywhere. When I got off the phone with him, I called a man named Bob Rook. I grew up with his son, and I told him what was going on. And he said, Freddie, he says, don't you worry about anything. He says, what you're doing is right and the way you're thinking is right. And just this good, peaceful spirit came over me, and I knew that I was on the right track. And so after that was over, these are the kinds of things that our kids need to know, because they have to learn how to stand. They need courage. They need knowledge. They need programs like this that will ground them in the restoration. Anyhow. I want to give you a snapshot of the weekend program. Friday night, the venturers arrive around 6 or 7, and one of the most important things that night is that you don't make the hosts wait around long for the youth. They're to go back to the home, and they're to start their conversations with them and get to know them. It's one of the greatest blessings that home will receive in a long time. It's just, it's uplifting for everybody involved. But you do spend a little bit of time with them at the church. So arrive maybe, and I'm just throwing out some ballparks here. It's been a long time since I was at these things. So arrive between 6 and 7. Here's some of the things that took place. You received home assignments. So they would call a host forward and say, so-and-so and so-and-so, you go with them. And you grabbed your stuff and went. But that was after you met with them for a little bit. But that's how it went when it came to the home assignments. You have prayer, maybe a mixer, maybe sing a little bit, receive a focusing message, very short, receive some instructions, some reminders about how the weekend's going to run, and then you receive your first set of essay questions at some point on that weekend. I don't remember if it was the first night or not, but you received your first set of essay questions that were due at the next huddle. And then you headed out. So you might be at the church until 8 o'clock, or 7:30 or 8 o'clock, but you got to be out of there. Saturday, arrive, I don't know, maybe 8 a.m. You worship, things to plan for during the huddles. The host branch needs to provide food for lunch and dinner. That's the way I remember. I think that's how it always went. A couple of classes, tracting by twos. You don't have to tract at every huddle, but they did do it. Probably 2 out of the 4 was not uncommon. And you want to pair up somebody, hopefully, who had done it before with somebody who hadn't. That's always a comfort. That can't always happen. And we were dropped off and picked up by van. You prepare for some home visits on sometimes, and I'm not going to tell you how to run this thing, so whoever takes this job under their wing is going to have to make this their own kind of thing, because you can't do all of the things that I'm listing here in one weekend. So maybe on weeks that you don't do tracting, you're going to go home visiting to homes where people haven't been engaged in a while, right? Someone who hasn't been to church in several months or whatever. So you take these youth out, maybe in groups of 2 or 3, to a home for a visit. They return to the church, they share out their experiences, and let me tell you, there's been some really fantastic experiences that took place on these home visits. You practice the music because you're going to be putting on the Sunday service. You prepare the venturers for that service. There's going to be a lot of times you ask kids if they will be involved by sharing a testimony or doing a reading or whatever it might be. Maybe they're doing an offertory message or collecting and handing it to the minister in the back of the church after they collect the tithes and offerings. But having kids involved as much as possible is really important. And then you return to the host around 8 o'clock or so and visit with them. On Sunday, you're going to practice singing, prepare for the service consisting of those things we just talked about. Kids who know musical instruments, fantastic. Let them display their talents. It was always a benefit to the service. If a venturer is a priesthood member, he might do a mini sermon. If you don't have a venturer who is priesthood, there might be one brought by one of the leaders, a short sermon or a mini sermon. Always trying to keep the youth involved, sharing testimonies or something during service. We want to keep them involved as much as possible. That's why we do the mini sermons, I think. The venturers may attend Sunday school or may be practicing preparing during that time. You have to make it your own. Now, any questions about the huddles, the weekend huddles? Okay? Yeah. He's almost to you.
I guess I'm wondering how close the last huddle was to the actual Vacation Bible School trip, and were the classes all prepared by the end of the fourth huddle, or were you still
No, you
working
would.
on them?
I gotcha. So probably around the second huddle, you started forming the groups. The kids would have to decide what age group they wanted to be involved with teaching. Okay, so the leaders might pick out certain youth to be an adult class teacher. Not that that might happen during the week there, but they'll teach the Sunday school class, the adult class on Sunday at the end of the Bible school. You only want certain ones doing that. It's you need somebody who's, well, you know who you need. But you break them up into these groups for different age levels in groups of probably 2 or 3 or so right in there, because these kids aren't going to, the same kids aren't going to teach every day. It's too much for them in this short amount of time they're preparing, right? So they're going to rotate. So they're going to begin brainstorming ideas on what they can do to teach whatever topic they're going to teach. You're going to need so we'll keep going here. It says 2 to 3 ventures for recreation. You need it would be good to have a youth music director if you can. The evenings provide some time for prep for the next day. 1 to 2 nights of home visiting during that week would be a good thing. So you're really trying to build up the congregation, right? The goal is to really help this congregation, trying to bring in kids from the neighborhood, trying to bring in adults from the neighborhood to come and hear the message of Christ. So that's why you really need weathered ministers to be on board with this, because they need to know how to handle various situations that come up. Young priesthood members might get shook, right? So you need someone who's a little older to help that. And you might you're going to do a day of tracting during this week, right? Because the goal is to reach out. So you're going to go out and hand tracts out and invite people to the Bible, invite their kids to the Bible school and to come to church on Sunday and so forth. So that would happen early in the week. And then the visiting might happen a couple of nights during that week. So down at the bottom, Saturday after the Bible school was over was kind of a recreation for the venturers. It was a kind of a break, kind of a at the end of the week. They've been very busy. They've been very active, and they need some downtime. So I remember us going to a beach one time. Maybe there's some local thing that kids can go to for fun on a Saturday. They still have to spend that Saturday at some point getting ready for the Sunday service, but they need that. So the Ventures put on the Sunday service just like they did at the huddle. And that's really kind of how the program runs. And I can tell you that we have, because of this program, in the 3 years that I was in there, and I just, in my mind, was just rattling off name after name after name, I could rattle off 11 priesthood members in the 3 years that I was in it. So there were 11 priesthood members. That was just off the top of my head, and I'm probably missing a couple. And there are also young ladies who were now becoming Sunday school teachers, or were involved in the camps or the retreats or the caravans or whatever it might be. This really sparked their interest, and they felt a place of belonging. They felt needed. They felt like they were doing something for Christ. And you know, and I know, that when you do things for Christ, that's when you start to have your experience. That's when your faith grows. It grows through struggle. And that's why I don't think we should deny our kids the understanding of the struggle that the church went through, or what you went through personally. My kids know the struggle that I went through when I was 18 years old, and that happened to me. They need to know how Dad stood back in that day, and how other people around him stood and supported, and why we believe what we believe. Any other questions? Yes.
I was wondering about your Monday through Friday. How, like when we do Bible schools or VCSs, vacation church schools, they're generally about 4 hours long.
Yeah.
Per day. Is that about how long you would do it?
Yeah.
Like at 8 to noon?
I think we did, it might have been 9 to, yeah, it probably was 8 to noon or somewhere, wasn't it, Jay?
Yeah, we were usually done by 12, 1 o'clock.
Yeah. I think did we provide food for the kids?
We provided snacks.
Provided snacks. Okay.
Some of us do Bible school at night instead of during the day.
And we've done that as well. We did that.
A nighttime so you have adult instruction as well then? Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah, we did that as well.
Not in my year, not my 3 years. I don't remember doing an evening one.
We did at Chatham.
Did we? Okay. Gosh, Bob started that. It was going, I was going to say, his wife, I think, was in the first one.
1972.
So I went from 72 through 84, 85, and then when the church split, it began to, I think it was even going after that, but it was not like it was. It was really fizzled. But why it didn't continue in the Restoration branch, I don't know, unless it was just manpower.
You want me to share anything?
I do in a minute. Go ahead.
Were all of your ministry, like your huddles and your VBS, that was outside of your home congregation?
Yes.
Did you do any ministry for the home congregation?
I mean, sometimes it may have ended up that you might have gone back to one of the kids' congregations or a few of the kids, but typically we were gone. We went all over Michigan, so we even went into Canada for a weekend huddle. So it just depended. Yeah. Am I not paying attention? Are there questions on this thing? Oh, okay, go ahead.
Just a request, if we could use the mic, please, so people online can hear. Thank you.
Weren't we using it? Somebody must not have. It was probably Howard. Question? Brian? Oh, Marissa?
Just a comment. One of the huddle was held in Mount Clemens.
And that's where her daughter and son went. Over here.
My first witnessing weekend I went on, I was 12 years old. And a lot of the same things you were talking about for your huddles was the same things we did in witnessing weekends. And we would do witnessing weekends, the other ones I would do afterwards. I mean, we'd show up on the Friday night. We did the same thing you're talking about, and Saturday and so forth. But when in case there's those thinking about maybe a phase 2 also, it could be more in advance and maybe do more from a witnessing weekend standpoint, and not just a Bible school or something. We could possibly develop it more into like a youth witnessing weekend group. And so I just throw that out for everybody to consider too.
Your youth will make lifelong friendships, which is strengthening to the church. I'm still very tight with a lot of those ventures. I really can't say enough about the program. It just developed young people, got them out of their comfort zone, taught them to witness for Jesus Christ, provided that for them, provided the opportunity. And like I said, it's not for every youth. Some youth might shy away from something like this, but I tell you, the ones that get involved in it, it's something they'll never forget. Yes?
Is there a reason why it was called huddles? Or it's just...
Nope, you just huddle up like in football. It's kind of like thinking about it that way. Everybody just came together. They didn't. I think they tried to get away from the term retreat, and so they called it a huddle. So everybody just kind of gathered in and focused themselves on a certain goal. I'm going to let Jay talk now. Jay was one of our leaders, and he can give you maybe a little different perspective from what he went through.
As one of the leaders, Freddie was one of our problem kids. No, Freddie really did a good job of kind of giving you an overview of the program. I want to give you a little bit of a perspective from the staff point of view and what we tried to do as a staff. The one thing that, you ask about the huddles as opposed to retreats. It was a distinctive thing. We wanted this program to be thought of as a different type of a youth program than what was normally run in our stake at the time. This was a program that was focused on service, instruction, and gaining knowledge of the church and taking that knowledge and ingraining it into the lives of the kids. The staff that ran the program, we had a lot of pre-huddle experience. We sat down as staff and we said, okay, this is what we're going to try to do this year. This will be the focus of the Bible school that they will eventually teach. And the Bible school was their reward. If they met all the requirements, they went. And we had kids that didn't meet the requirements, so they didn't go on the trip. So there was some incentive involved in there. But the thing of it is that from a philosophical and from a working process was we simply wanted the kids to understand not only the church, but we wanted them to know the doctrine of the church. We wanted them to know the reasons the church existed. And we wanted them to know things that even us as adults struggled with. I can remember one of the essay questions. When I saw the question, I had no clue. I'm a convert to the church, so I didn't have any clue. But they had to answer a question about how an elders court operated. Now, that's something that you're not going to find in a retreat situation. So that's the depth that we tried to get to, tried to take them. I can tell you there have been some tremendous testimonies that came out. We put these kids out on a corner and said, okay, this block is your block to track. Here's the track. I want you to knock on the door. I want you to invite them to church, and I want you to be able to tell them something about the church.
See you in an hour.
And we will see you in an hour, exactly. And we just left them to go. But you know what? There are some tremendous testimonies came back from that the young people had. And those testimonies still live within my heart and mind because it, to me, signified that they really understood and got the message of the church and the gospel of Jesus Christ. Then we would take him into the homes, as Fred would say, for visitation. And we say, we drop them off at the front door. We'll see you in 45 minutes. We didn't go in with them. That's their responsibility, to witness to that family and to share with that family. And there's been some great testimony out of that. The thing of it is, we wanted these kids to be pushed to the knowledge that they needed to stay grounded in the church and to stay grounded in the gospel of Jesus Christ. We didn't coddle them. What typically would happen as the staff got together, we would say, okay, we're going to have huddles at this branch, and this branch. Our final huddle is going to be here. We're going to have a summer pre-Bible school activities, usually a picnic, where we put the final dots on all the I's and cross the T's as to what was going to happen in the Bible school. I want to tell you, some of those young men and ladies did a marvelous job teaching those kids. And we didn't stand there shielding them from any questions that came from the floor, particularly in the adult class. And, you know, we were very mindful of who we thought would be the best young people to teach the adult class. And they did a marvelous job. So, really, what this program did was provide grounding for our youth. It provided a sense of belonging to the church, not just sitting in the church. They took ownership of their membership. And that's what you have to, if you're going to run this program, that's what you need, is you give them whatever tools they need and then back off and allow them to use those tools to complete the job. And if you do that, you're going to see some tremendous growth in your young people. Now, that doesn't guarantee that they're always going to stay in the church. But you know what? I have met many of those young people that we put through this program. Some have stayed with the church, some haven't. But the common thread is they remember what they did, and it's still important to them. My wife and I, Kathy and I, have been put in touch with two couples that were part of that program. They no longer attend the church. We still, for whatever reason, we're back in their lives. But every time we get together, that's what we talk about. Their experience that they had during those huddles. And that's a thread that we want to be able to grasp a hold of, because if anything's going to pull them back into the church, that thread is it. So we give them that opportunity. You know, retreats are wonderful. Camps are wonderful, and then you learn some things. But you know, when we sat down with those kids on a Saturday morning, we said, okay, this morning, we're going to have a class. You're all going to sit in this class, and we talked about a specific, maybe it was church history, or maybe it was something out of the scriptures. We made sure they understood those things. We got them into their scriptures, and we taught those things so that when they had the opportunity to teach at Bible school, they had that background to be able to refer to. And be able to provide good Bible school for those branches. Now, I and the director at the time, we would go ahead of the first huddle, usually in the summer. We'd go outside of, usually it was outside of Michigan, maybe Indiana, like Fred said, Chatham. We would go to some other place outside of Michigan, and we would sit down with them and we say, this is the program we have. We would like to come and put on your Bible school for this summer. Would you be willing to do this? This is what we're going to need from you, and would you be willing to do this? And we would work out all those details so we knew going into the first huddle where we were going to end up. It takes a dedicated staff. It takes a staff that can work very well together. It takes a staff that is willing to yield sometimes when they have to, and wield sometimes when they have to. But it has to be a cohesive staff. You have to be able to get along. Now, I will tell you, I'll share one testimony, and because it just really kind of shows how the Lord works when you put this effort forward. I said we send kids out to do tracking. We got a call from a congregation in Lexington, Kentucky. They were moving their church from one location to another location, a new area that was being built up, and they wanted us to come and introduce the church into that area. So we said, fine. So we got all the kids in the van. We're headed south, and this is about the time when things started going south as far as the church was concerned. I was with one of the other leaders who was of the mind that the church was going in the right direction. I was of the mind that it wasn't. And we had a lot of discussion between Michigan and Lexington, Kentucky. And by the time I got to Lexington, Kentucky, I was thinking, this is great. I'm going to be in a host home, and he's going to be in some other host home, and I won't have to worry about this. So the next morning we got up, we went to this neighborhood, and we started organizing the tracking. And the patriarch said, I think the adults are going to track as well today. And guess who I got paired with? But let me tell you how the Lord worked in that situation. Now, I could have throttled this guy, quite honestly, on the trip down. I was just that hot under the collar. But let me tell you how the Lord works when you step aside and yield instead of wielding. We went door to door, and we did it like the youth. You two. So the first door, one youth would knock on the door, then the next house was that next youth's turn, so we did that as an adult. And if you knocked on a door, then nobody was home, you had the next house as well. So that's the way we did it. So we're knocking on these doors, we're introducing the church, and we'd probably gotten 5 or 6 houses, and all of a sudden the Lord is just revealing some things to me. I'm thinking, how is it possible that I know this? The first time this happened, I knocked on the door, this young woman came to the door, I gave her my spiel, and the Spirit bore witness to me that she was a single mother struggling. Okay. And so, we kept going. About the 8th or 9th house, this fella, we're walking down the sidewalk, and he stops me and he goes, "Hey, have you had any unusual experiences at any of the houses we've been at?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "The very first house, I knew that lady was a single mother and she was struggling." And he said, "Well, the first house I knocked on," he says, "I knew there was alcoholism in the house." And this went on. The whole time we tracked, the Lord was revealing things to us. And we were able to go back and give a different kind of report. Now, I don't know that happened with the kids, but it did happen with us. But had we not been of the mind to just yield, the Lord wouldn't have worked that way. That this program, if you do it, you got to go 100%. And you got to put your kids in some pretty tough spots. But I guarantee you, they will grow from that. And not only will they grow, they will come to cherish those experiences, and they will become more firmly grounded in the gospel of Jesus Christ and the work of the church. That's all I got to say.
You know, through this program, it does ground us, and that's why I was able to go through that trial that I went through when I was 18 years old. I knew from that experience, because of my upbringing and the training that I received, that this church didn't belong to that guy that railed on me over the phone. It didn't belong to him. It didn't belong to anybody else either. It belonged to Jesus Christ. And that was my firm foundation. So these lessons that we learned especially in this program, were invaluable. I mean, they were just, you can't put a price on it. And it grounded me in the faith to know that God speaks today. And I'm going to just bear one testimony to you. And the reason I'm going to share it with you is because it happened when I was really young. While I was going through this, I just completed the Youth Venture for Christ program. And I was a young priest in the church. And I had read in the scriptures, of course, in the Book of Mormon about the angels, right? And it said, the scriptures say that they appear to those of a strong faith and firm mind. And I think that that's what this program does. I think that it creates a strong faith and a firm mind. Not just this program, all of the programs, but this really, really stood out to me. And so when I was a young priest in the church, it was my second sermon that I was going to be bringing. I was just turning 18 years old. And they had scheduled me for the Christmas service, which I was happy. Actually, it didn't schedule me for it. There were 3 cancellations, guys switching with me on the schedule, that put me at the Christmas service. So it was kind of seemed like it was all being coordinated by our Lord. And I remember that I thought that my sermon was already set. Everybody knows what to preach on at Christmas, the birth of Christ. So I started studying and praying, and I wasn't being led to preach on the birth of Christ, which kind of a little bit annoyed me because it made me nervous that I didn't feel led to do that. And I kept being guided towards not the first coming of Christ or his birth, but the second coming of Christ in glory. And I didn't understand why this was happening at Christmas time. But I went with it because I learned how to be sensitive to the Spirit through programs like this. And so 1 week before I was to give this sermon, I started fasting and praying. Every day I fast. I fasted breakfast and lunch. I didn't want anybody to know what I was doing. I got to tell you, I worked for Burger King, and I was the guy who made the burgers. So it was a challenge for a young guy to be making burgers for people, especially when they're coming off the flame grill. I mean, they're sizzling and stuff. So it was a challenge, believe me. But I fasted breakfast and lunch, and then I went home, and I went up into my room, and I studied and prayed. And then I would come down to dinner with my parents, and then I'd go back up into my room, and I would study and pray some more because this topic was bigger than me. I mean, it's something that it was not something that I had delved into a whole lot. And so I really studied a lot. And so I did this all week long until I came to Saturday. And Saturday, I fasted the whole day. And I prayed and I studied. And I prayed and studied all into the night. It was 3 a.m. when I felt like I was finally ready for my sermon. Every night during the week, I tacked on at the end of my prayer. I prayed about my sermon and everything, and then I would tack on the end of my prayer. I said, Lord, will you please send your angels to be with us on that Sunday morning? Saturday night came, and when I felt like I was ready, I found my sermon, my prayer wasn't so much about my sermon as it was about these angels. I found myself praying for more about these angels. So anyways, the night was short. I got up the next day, and I had a lot going on in my mind. I mean, second sermon, my thoughts about my sermon were just wheeling around in my head. Went to church, and right before the service, I got nervous, and I'm walking in. We were meeting in a school. It was a missionary branch, so we're meeting in an elementary school, and I'm pacing in the back hallway behind the library, and praying, and I felt that good spirit minister to my soul, and I felt peace. So the priesthood came back. We prayed. We went out into the gym this particular day. We were having a potluck after, and I delivered the sermon. I felt a good spirit during that, and when it was over, we were getting ready for potluck, and this guy came up to me and pulled me to the side. He says, "Fred," he says, "were you aware of that personage that was standing behind you?" And not even remembering anything about my prayer, I'm thinking back to my sermon, like, are you talking about a testimony that I shared? And he says, no. He says, while you were preaching up there today, he said, there was a person that's standing behind you, and he says, when you said certain things, he said, a bright glow came out from behind you. And then it sparked. Oh my gosh, I remember. That is what I had prayed for. And so now I got a testimony, right? So, potluck's over. We get in the car. I'm driving with my sister. My parents are in another car. We have a 45-minute drive. My parents wanted to stop at a store on the way home. So I'm riding with my sister, and I said, Wendy, I got to tell you what this guy had, this experience that he had. And she says, before you say anything, I want to tell you what I saw. I said, okay. She says, while you were standing up there preaching, she said, I saw a glow around you the entire time you were preaching. And I thought, okay, so people are at different levels, they see different things, and now I got another testimony that God was with me. Fantastic. We went to the store. My parents are walking around. I go, Dad, you got to come over here. I got to tell you something. So I pulled my dad to the side, and I said, this is what happened. I shared with him what the guy told me, what Wendy told me. He got all swelled up with tears in his eyes, and he said, that's great, and he walked away. And I'm like, where are you going right now? I want to talk about this. And he just walked away. And so that ended the day, kind of. We never talked about it again. The next day, my dad asked me if I'd give him a ride someplace. I said, yeah. So we get in the car and we start driving. He says, Fred, he says, I didn't want to share this with you yesterday because of the experiences that you shared with me, and you're rejoicing in them. He says, but I want to tell you what I saw. He said, while you were up there preaching, he said, I was sitting out in the congregation listening to you. And he was the pastor of the branch at the time. And he said, while I was listening to you, all of a sudden, he says, I was listening to you, and all of a sudden these white lights started flashing back behind the priesthood. And he says, I looked at it, and he says, I wasn't sure what I was seeing. So he says, I ducked my head, and I looked back up, and he says, there were those white lights flashing back behind you again. He says, underneath those flashing white lights, like concert lights, he said, was a silhouette of 4 men standing back there. And then I knew the truth of the scriptures that said the Aaronic priesthood have the right to call on the ministering of angels. When you extend yourself and you put your efforts into it and you can go no further, that the Lord will send those ministering angels to be with you. But my faith was grounded because of programs like this, and because of the youth camps and the youth retreats and the reunions that I went to. And when people come together and they start living like Christ wants them to live, and I felt like our reunions were a Zionic experience. The world was away from us, and we were together worshiping our risen Lord, the one who restored his church again. And that's the kind of grounding that our youth need. And they can have that. We just need people who will step up and make these things happen.
So Fred, I'm going to ask you to get a copy of this to Kevin. We're going to post this presentation on the website under Youth Ministries, to where you at least have those the information that Fred went over with you. We've got youth council coming up, but more importantly, I think we've got the various regions, and we've got certainly right here CMRB and the POZ. I think there's some things that we could do here and perhaps send the youth out to maybe some outlying areas to be able to help in the branches there or to be able to help here. I like the phase 1 and the phase 2. I think there's really something we really need to take a close look at here. And so was hoping to spend some time to drill down on this a little bit. Hopefully we'll have some other time to be able to do that, and we'll come back to this. But we're going to take just a 8-minute break here, and we're going to meet back here at 3 o'clock, and we'll get our next business session started. So thank you, Fred. Thank you, Jay, for all those that participated in pulling this together.